And it was this gentleman. In the 1880s, this gentleman, Ferdinand Lesseps, he was successful in building the Suez Canal at sea level in the 1860s, and decided his next canal project would be to cross Panama. So the Suez Canal project was very successful. In fact, it was so successful that it made it easy for him to get construction money from the government and from his former investors in the Suez Canal. This gentleman was extremely charismatic, and he was a very great presenter as well. So he thought he was in the right place at the right time to duplicate the success he had with the Suez Canal. Suez Canal, by the way, is a sea level canal, and the geology of the area was much easier to excavate. And of course, it was much longer. It was a little over 100 miles in length. So again, with his successful reputation and charisma, it was easy for him to get the French government's backing for the sale of construction bonds. And also, thousands of French citizens who previously cashed in on investing with Lesseps on the Suez Canal happily gave him more funding. So de Lesseps started construction on a Panama Canal in the year 1881. His company used excavators that continually dug and dumped the dirt into railway cars, and then they moved the dirt out via this method. Even though his engineers advised against it, he was utterly convinced that he could build this canal just like the Suez because he believed it could be built at sea level. Well, with no locks. Well, clearly, we know today he was wrong. And de Lesseps was convinced he would be successful with a sea level canal. He could not believe this canal could be any more difficult than the Suez, which was, again, twice the length. But he did take into proper account the differing conditions between the desert of Egypt and the jungles of Panama. In time, he had 25,000 workers employed on what was to become the largest earth-moving project in world history. Disaster soon struck the French effort. Heavy rains, mudslides. This caused problems for the canal builders, just as it did for the railroad builders. Equipment rusted, clothing rotted, furniture fell apart, and of course, disease hit them hard. Part of the problem for the French as well as the U.S. Railroad, again, they did not know the causes of these two diseases, which of course were yellow fever and malaria. In fact, they blamed ground vapors, swamp gases, and crawling bugs as the source of the diseases. Well, they called the common malady the Chagres fever after the name of the river. And of course, again, yellow fever and malaria, as we know today, are spread by mosquitoes, but no one, absolutely no one, had a clue at this time, and it would be still some time later before they got it figured out. Well, since the Panama Canal was a major undertaking for France, indeed, for the glory of France, many new graduates of the French engineering schools set out for Panama for a grand and glorious experience and adventure. Yeah. This, folks, is the French cemetery in Panama. It is estimated today that between 20 and 22,000 people died over an 8-year period during what they refer to as the French effort. So in 1885, Lesseps finally realized locks would be required to build the canal. Well, it was too late. His project failed, and in 1889, his company was dissolved. Though they still have holdings and contracts and treaties and other connections, we'll call them. So even though the French did not complete a canal across Panama, they did move a lot of dirt. Totals of what they moved were about 30 million cubic yards. This was about the 2/3 of the total excavated for the Suez Canal. However, in Panama, even though this is a large number, it only really represented 1/10 of the earth that needed to be excavated to build the Panama Canal. Meanwhile, back in the USA, the government was looking at several options for building the canal across Central America, and the most popular route in Washington, D.C. was to build one across the country of Nicaragua. It would also utilize the large lake, which of course is Lake Nicaragua, for much of their length. Also, there were 4 other basic routes across the Panama Isthmus with several different variations. All of these locations being considered were routes that were used during the California Gold Rush. So they were examining, in other words, all the various possibilities. So in addition to the U.S. businessmen who had been lobbying in favor of a Panama location, another influential gentleman was Felipe Bernard Faria. He was a Frenchman who had been involved with De Lesseps in the French venture. Well, the fact is they still had a financial interest, and I think the easiest way to put it is holdings and treaties, and then they reformed their first company into a second French company to try and protect the assets that they had. And he did this with going out to the American government with continuing support for them to buy what they had done and all their connections for $40 million. So when the Nicaraguan Canal Bill went to the Senate, an amendment was added in which called for the canal to be built in Panama if the assets of that second French company could be bought for no more than $40 million. And it had another provision that if the purchase was not successful, the canal then would be built in Nicaragua. So we came probably this close to building a canal across the country of Nicaragua if it hadn't have been for Berea intervening and being politically very influential. So obviously he was the gentleman that was instrumental in having the amendment added, and he knew the assets could be bought for a mere $40 million. Well, just as this vote was going to the Senate, we're going to build a canal in Nicaragua, or we're going to buy these French assets for $40 million and continue with their project and build it across Panama. The Nicaragua route was much favored by politicians in D.C. Even Theodore Roosevelt was a backer of the Nicaragua project in the beginning. So Mr. Faria, when he knew this vote was coming up, just a few days before the vote, he came up with a very unusual and clever idea. Here's what he did. He sent this stamp out. Take a look at it. He sent this to all the people who were going to vote on that bill. And on the stamp, as you can see, there is a picture right back here of an erupting volcano. Happened to be Momotambo. So his point was, look at this real Nicaraguan stamp and look at this active volcano, and do you really want to build a canal through an area where there's so much volcanic activity?